Welcome to Reclaim Today. I think I finally have all the technology gods aligned with me. We'll see. Who knows? Say a prayer right now for everybody. But I'm joined here today by the one and only Cogdog, Alan Levine, as
Hi
well
there.
as well as my confidant across the sea, Jim Groom. You like
Copy,
that?
Jimmy.
Can I copy?
And I figured, so Alan, I wanted to get you on this episode because we just recently started rolling out SPLOTs more generally as a more automated way for us to start showing off work in Reclaim Hosting's environment. Obviously, SPLOTs aren't anything new, and I'll get you to talk a little bit more about the history and backstory of them. Um, but it seemed timely. We've got a lot going on. We started a fellowship with you earlier this year, and this was kind of one idea: was how can we make things, a lot of them built on top of WordPress, which you have a lot of experience with, but how can we make that easy for people so we're not giving them sort of a laundry list of installation instructions, install this plugin, that plugin, do this. I remember the not one, not two, but five, I think it's 5 or 6 part post on how to use feed WordPress, and which I still link to, and it's still good, but I could totally understand people going, yeah, I'm kind of out there. So, Alan, give me a little backstory. Like, what is a SPLOT? What does it mean? Can you settle once and for all what the acronym for SPLOT means, and how did these come about?
Absolutely not. There is no meaning, and that's the beauty of it, or definition. But this all came about from a fellowship I had starting in late 2014 at Thompson River University with the great Brian Lamb, and literally our first night there. At the Fox and Hound, Brian was describing this idea to deal with two issues of, as he was trying to kind of spread the use of many things, but including sort of a WordPress multi-site. And it was the idea about like, instead of giant, big mega tools, like single purpose things that were useful to faculty, but the more important thing, an issue that was very important in Canada, was like, the problems with using free services that were based in the US that asked for personal identification. So the question was, does everything really require creating accounts? And so that was kind of the beginning. But Brian literally said, he says, Alan, I know you hate acronyms, but I got this acronym. And he said SPLOT. And like, I probably spit my beer across the table in fun, because I just like to tease Brian. But he first caught it, and there is a tweet. It was probably smallest possible learning online tool. So it really does stand for something.
But in the meantime, it's been rearranged into different things. And I know if you go to splot.ca, which I guess is sort of the main website for where some of these things are housed and information about them, it talks about some of that, which is really cool. And you've kind of built, we call all of these splots, but it's not quite fair to. I think you described as a good one, which is like these are really tools, things like, and we'll get to looking at some examples in a minute, like the image collector, sort of a media collection box application, sort of front end applications that people can interact with. But you've gone above and beyond that, I think, in terms of these landing page sites and other more theme specific things, which really start to get into like some basic, I don't want to say like web design tools, but really onboarding someone to the process of creating personal pages too. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. And it kind of came about from the first connected courses workshop thing that we did at the DML conference, which were hosted on the State U platform. And some of it is just the recognition is that when you get a domain, it's a bit overwhelming, especially when you look at cPanel. Mm-hmm. And pretty much, people, for the most part, they probably create a WordPress site and stick it at the top of their domain. And it's trying to get across this idea that a domain is really like, I'd say, Jim has his metaphors. Mine's very similar. As a piece of land, it's potential. And you don't have to have just one house on there. You can have, a garden shed, and you can have like a guest house, and think about having many different structures. But I was really thinking like the front door should really be a simple thing, like a calling card, like the thing you would put on your Twitter profile or on your email footer. The place, because you're going to create lots of sites. And my Cogdog blog, it started out as a blog, and that's all that's there. But if I was doing it again, I would probably want to create like a simple page about Alan Levine that kind of acts as a traffic director to send people to other things that I build. And you turned me on into the cPanel site publishing tool, and it works out well because in the workshop, people's first experience, they can get something up there at their domain in a few minutes, and then the next reaction is, "I hate that," you know, and it's hard to edit. And I tried, you can throw people a little bit into the file manager and try to get them having some understanding that there's this file structure to their domain. But at the same time, it's like, that is not the way you want to be building your landing page. But it's put that there, then learn how to install WordPress somewhere else, in a directory or a subdomain. And then you come back and replace that crappy looking thing with one of these, I call them calling card themes. And it started from these great HTML5 templates that are all licensed Creative Commons. And I actually, when you got me my calling card domain, which is cog.dog, I use this one called Dimension because it's really simple. It's like a single screen. And then I was working on, I created another one for another educator as a client. And then Mariana Funes asked me for something very similar. And I was thinking like, well, I can do it easily, but anytime she wants to change it, she either has to learn some HTML or she has to bug me. And I just started thinking about the way that was structured. If it was possible, that could be like brought into a WordPress environment, which is easier for people to edit. And I found a couple posts about like building a WordPress theme from scratch, and that was the first one that I did. And because HTML5 themes are kind of all structured very similarly, the two others that we added were not that difficult to figure out how to get into that interface. But the idea is now that you've got the domain, now you can put something that you really would feel good about, and that you can manage and change as you go at the front door. And by the time you've done that, you've installed WordPress, you maybe dealt with a plugin or two, and so it's kind of ratcheting up people's levels with what they can do in domain of one's own.
Absolutely. That's great. It's like you said, I mean, it's kind of like this gateway drug, right? Like you get HTML and cPanel, and then suddenly it's like, well, now how do I edit that? And then you're leading them towards a content management system in WordPress, but doing it in stages, which I really like. And so we rolled out the big picture calling card, which was the first sort of installer. And I know we're going to bring that up with highlights and dimension, or the other two calling card themes that you've got out right now that we want to roll into installers as well, and then get into some of the other tools too. Now, previously, you were using a feature of Installatron called templates, right? Which was a little difficult on the server side for us to manage. I think we had to do a lot of tricky things in order to make those options when people were installing WordPress that they could choose these things. But obviously that doesn't scale very well, because as you grow into more and more applications built on top of WordPress, it becomes this laundry list, and maybe people really just want a clean WordPress site and didn't necessarily need to choose between all these things and go, well, I don't even know what a SPLOT is, and didn't want that. So that was sort of the impetus for us to create these as standalone installers to really kind of level up that directory of applications that Installatron has, where you'd see 100 applications, most of them are crap, and so you're trying to wade through and say, what's the good stuff? And we wanted to take even the ones that were built on WordPress and really highlight them as standalone applications, because in many ways I think these really can be these single purpose things that you install. And Jim, you've had a lot of success talking about this, right, with other schools. I know Coventry, you've done a lot of work with them, and other schools when you go to talk about stuff and you say, oh, and by the way, here's this SPLOT thing, and they're like, whoa, wait a second, that's really interesting, right?
I was wondering, Tim, if you want me, Alan brought it up, do you want me to go through my whole house metaphor?
I don't
do a quick presentation.
Actually, not.
We're trying to keep these podcasts somewhat short, and so I'm not sure this time that they'll be, but maybe we could dedicate a whole episode to your metaphors, and that could be useful.
Two? I actually think I could spread it across 3. But yeah, I mean, the Coventry thing was interesting because Brian Lamb, I was there with him in 2016, and he talked about SPLOTs, and it was the first time I actually heard anyone present on them. And he really kind of, I think, sold the Coventry community, so that Daniel Villar on Rubio has been doing amazing stuff with Lauren Haywood. and their latest hire, Charlie Lamb. And it's a really kind of cool community that has been using SPLOTs. I mean, everything from the Dimension calling card, which is Daniel's main site, to the image collector, to the video SPLOT. Like, they have been doing it all, and they've been spreading it around. So that was pretty easy to go there and listen to their community get excited about it.
Yeah,
So,
and while you're talking, I want to pull up some of these examples so people can actually see as you're talking through some of this what the hell a SPLOT actually looks like and what kind of form it takes. And you had sent me some of these links as well.
I did. And I actually do have another link I want to share with you, which circles back to the house idea.
I can't work on the fly like this, Jim.
This is a professional production here.
So you were mentioning Daniel's site. I've got that pulled up here, and so that's a good example, which ironically, I think this is the same theme that I'm using for my own calling card at timowens.io.
Dimension. It's gorgeous. And they told me they run entire like graduate student workshops where graduate students all get up and running on Coventry domains because they have their own domain instance there that's growing. And they bring graduate students and they ask them to kind of frame their profile portfolio through this Dimensions theme. And it's a really elegant theme. You'll see here Tim Owens, he's got the wood. He doesn't really blog anymore, so this is all you would see. You go to his page.
He's got one box.
He doesn't do much anymore, but what do we know?
Oh, wait.
Ironically, I've even got a Twitter account here, apparently.
But, I mean, I do. I think the Dimension one is awesome. This is a good example of one of your newer SPLOTs, Alan. This is the Media SPLOT.
Yeah.
Media Box SPLOT. And you'll see they are actually using this to promote their OWL-TE project, which is about the open web for teaching and learning in higher ed. And it's really cool. We got a whole bunch of people who were at Coventry who did videos with Daniel. And they're featured. And the nice part about this is they obviously seeded a bunch of videos, but anyone can add a video. It can be from YouTube, from the archive.org, Vimeo, etc. It's really elegant. And we had interest when we did the workshop at Coventry just a few weeks ago. There was instant interest by faculty with this because a lot of the work they're doing for their online courses is made up of a lot of videos. So it just made a lot of sense for this to kind of be part of it. The other one I really love, Tim, is the one that's called WordBox.
Okay.
And
there you go.
I just want to talk about this for a quick second. I'll hand it back to you two. So Lauren Haywood was working with a art professor. And this art class is an introductory art class, I believe. And they were building, using the image collector, basically a glossary of art terms. And they were working with second language students. So a lot of the students were from China. So they used this as a way for them to become familiar with researching, thinking about English, writing in English, and building a glossary of art history terms. And I really love the image collector SPLOT because it's really cool. It's great looking. It can do text. It can do images. And it acts like a pinboard where you can see everything. And this is a SPLOT that I just thought was interesting because it gets at that idea of focused, tiny teaching tool, one project, a series of a kind of ongoing resource that class after class can contribute to, an open resource that other people can come back to and use. Students can say, I was a part of building this. And it just seems to me like the best of the kind of open web in terms of a quick, simple tool. The beauty also, as Alan brought up at the beginning of this discussion, is no one has to log in. Yeah. Right? Everything's dead simple. It's not overhead and showing people how to use WordPress. So I came out of Coventry again, just like, SPLOT, feeling the power. And, they're doing great stuff. So it's cool that we finally have, Tim, as you were saying, the ability to feature these tools individually across our shared hosting and domain schools to be able to install these tools simply and to really give each of them a kind of identity amongst themselves outside of WordPress, which I think is important for them to be their own thing and kind of live, because that can only come, at least for me, with seeing the examples like Lauren's, WordBox, Daniel's portfolio. I mean, that stuff speaks louder than anything.
And I think creating these applications too as standalone application installers, Alan, I know you've struggled quite a bit with how do I push out updates to people. These things don't really warrant living in the WordPress repository, and there's obviously strict rules on what can and can't go in the WordPress repository, and to the extent that you want to maintain that. So you've been doing a lot of work on GitHub. But that comes with its own concerns because it's kind of hard in WordPress to say, hey, I've got a new zip file that I want to replace the current theme with. And really, ideally, you want it to kind of function like, theme and plugin updates do right now on Reclaim, which is they happen automatically. You don't have to think about them. It takes a backup and then it upgrades for you. And you kind of want that to happen with this stuff as well. And so I think that's a real opportunity here for us to be able to regularly push out these updates and have people make
Went silent. That's gonna.
No.
Like getting people off the ground easier, and I go back and forth. Like I think there's a lot to be said about doing it from scratch, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. But you do get to learn about what all the moving parts are. But I think it does put a lot of people off. So we have a choice now. You can do it from scratch, or you can do it from the one-click installer. But the updates that are going to be available is a huge thing, and also that you start off with sample content instead of an empty site, which doesn't really show its functionality. And that's another piece, right? Because what we've been able to do is like basically you're going to get a copy of the demo site that we set up that not only has the theme set up and maybe the plugins it needed, but we've got a way to bring over the initial settings for the customizer, which then people go in to modify. And then there's some sample content that people can see how things are set up. And so I think it's going to get people off the ground a lot easier. And like you said, I've tried a couple different things. I've tried some of the migration plugins, and there's problem with that. And I tried a GitHub plugin pusher, and it just is not very reliable. So when you brought up this idea that it could be done through the installer, not only make it easier but make the updates automatic, it's kind of like the best of both worlds. And it also gets into, there was a little bit of Twitter banter kind of again bringing up the LMS versus the kind of small pieces join thing. And it's like, and like Brian Lamb commented, it's like nothing's changed in 14 years, but like what Reclaim is doing here is definitely doing something to scale what would take someone a lot of effort and make it available to people who maybe don't want to get in there and mess around with setting up themes and installing from scratch. And the real thing is getting it.
And absolutely.
Like Daniel and his crew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, it's also a way to say, hey, there's a lot of talk about like, well, WordPress, it's really just blogging software, or maybe you can create sites with it, but there's a lot of onboarding there. And I think this is a way to say, no, really, and Tom Woodward at VCU has pushed really hard on this, that WordPress can be anything you want it to be. Like WordPress is really, really flexible now. But it's nice when we can onboard that process a little bit on some of the things, especially that we can take the expertise from folks like you that have put together all of those solutions and turn it into an actual package. And so this is a way to really highlight that, no, this isn't just WordPress. This is a whole lot more than that. This is something special. So I'm really excited about it. Now we've got the 3 landing the calling card themes, and then you've got, I guess, 5 applications, media collector. I don't know if I'll remember all of them. Maybe you can help me with that. But what other stuff are you working on right now? Are you thinking of new ones, or is it more about refining the existing ones at the moment?
It's about both, and that's why I'll go back to Daniel, because what he and others have done is often they come up with a use idea that I haven't anticipated. So with the collector, which is really, all these came out of a sort of a need. So the initial idea for the collector was there were 2 instructional designers at TRU who were doing a workshop on open licensing, and they wanted to send people out to find images and to kind of create a site where they could share and what licenses they found out. And so I said, I think I can build something like that. But it was really built around the idea about collecting images. And then Daniel had this thing for a class where he had his students create like intros or bios about themselves in there with their picture or their avatar. And I was like, I never thought about that. And then it made sense. You don't necessarily want to sort it by the newest option where you can sort them alphabetically on the front page. So it would work with that word box. And then it was that project where they were working with a lot of students who were not English as a first language, that the instructions for the form where you upload, they were hard coded into the theme. And so they wanted to be able to customize them so it would make more sense to the instructional context. So I was able to figure out how to make all those form fields editable in the customizer. So anybody with one of these sites can reword the labels and the instructions on the forms to make it more clear to the use case that they're doing. And then also when Daniel was doing the thing with the bios, the text editor below was really just a caption. So I just had it as plain text. And he wanted people to write fully formed bios. So that said, okay, I know how to put the rich text editor in there. And then I used that in Mexico on the mural project where we had people working in groups to share reports back. So, a lot of these little ideas, kind of merged together with the SPLOT box. I set it up for working with audio and video. And then Daniel said, well, what about stuff from Internet Archive? So it actually wasn't that difficult to figure out how to add something that would allow the automatic embed for the Internet Archive. So, really the improvements come from seeing how people use them and their ideas feeding back.
Yeah, and being that all of this is built on WordPress, I'm curious just to get your take. How afraid are you of Gutenberg, the new WordPress editor that should be coming out here in the next couple months, and the way it changes things? Does it change anything for the SPLOT since it's mostly front end, or is it more for you as the developer side of things?
I'm a little bit behind and in denial, so it's on my list to look in first. I really don't see how they could really cut the functionality of existing WordPress. But I'm curious about it to see how it fits in, and it probably offers some opportunity. You mentioned the SPLOTs that'll come online is the image collector, the media collector. One of the most ones that are used widely is the writer, which basically allows kind of a rich writing environment for people to publish. I've used it with my students to sort of create like a little mini online journal. And so there is kind of set it up with sort of like a review process where you can have stuff come in like pending for publication that just looks nice. I'm kind of working on a new one that's still kind of in the drawn on a piece of paper stage. It's going to be kind of around creating little collections. Have a place where you can contribute different resources, whether they be like docs, links, videos, little like granular things. It sounds like OER 3.0. And so, but it's for a project with Tanis Morgan at JIBC, and there's sort of this need to represent them as collections of maybe 3 to 20 that are going to be like constellations. And so there's going to be a little bit of a sort of a jQuery representation of these little nodes and as stars in the sky. And I've always wanted to do one. Tom Woodward's done a lot of work with this, like a blackout poetry one, which I think would be very useful. And then, since we're with the idea now, what you've done with the installer for that first one, my thought is like we could set up a whole sort of system to install a working feed WordPress hub site, because like you said, that's a 5-part blog post with a lot of moving parts, and feed WordPress is kind of it's a little bit of a black box sometimes. And so I think if we could give people a way to get sort of a hub site out of the box would definitely be a big boom.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I also think, what we're not taking advantage of right now, but we could for sure, is that obviously when you go to install something in Installatron, you have all those form fields there and you're choosing things like the username and the password for the application, but it also asks you things like site title and tagline. And those are customizable as well. So we could even find ways to onboard the process at the point they're installing a particular SPLOT to say like, okay, well, what's your Twitter handle? What's your this? What's your that? And so then really when it's installed, a lot of that customization that would normally happen after the fact could already be done. It's happening as part of that install process, which I think would be cool. Jim, you've also talked, I think, and I'm obviously really interested in maybe the idea of something specifically for podcasts, because you're such a huge podcast fan. And, but we do get, when it does come to teaching and learning, that is something that I hear from folks where it's like, well, if I wanted to do something like Reclaim Today, or even, on a very small scale, how do I do that? How do I, create episodic content in WordPress versus your traditional post-based content?
Like recreating NPR radio on a website using a SPLOT.
Yeah.
If it wasn't bad enough on NPR.
Exactly.
You get a radio station with that?
Oh my God. Is there a DS106 radio app in our future? No, but I actually think that, one of the ones I was thinking of, obviously I was just thinking of as we were talking, but like, I'm still a man without a link collector. Like, I don't have like a really good bookmark tool. I'm afraid to sign up with Digo and Delicious. That's history gone. And Pinboard, I really like the guy who runs it and his whole vision, but I'm just kind of like, I'm back to like the whole, links in a text document, which is bizarre.
Yeah.
So, and so there's that one idea, do with it what you will. But the other thing is, back to the idea of the marketplace of small tools, right? Like, I think one of the things that SPLOTs could provide is, once we get rid of that ridiculous acronym and they actually have names and we can see them as individual tools, right? I think it opens up the idea of you can share, and people who are at these ed tech groups who are building tools can imagine, wait, this might be a way to distribute it. Like, this might be a way to bring that idea of independent ed tech tools to the fore, and SPLOT's really leading that way. Tom Woodward, we've talked about, he's done the Blackout Poetry one, and his group has a whole bunch of little really focused tools. And what if we had some sort of summit where people who are building these tools, like I heard from a guy from Boston College not too long ago, he's got a tool called Mediacron. There's this great tool called Grasshopper by Downs. Like, there's a whole group of independent ed techs who've been building this stuff. Now, there's always the trick about, sustaining, maintaining, where do we stand in that? But even if we just start having that conversation and getting people like, shut up about the LMS. Like, it's the most annoying, boring ass conversation about market share. Well, like, there's a group of people doing awesome stuff that we can help highlight where we can.
The best way to sustain it too, I think, is to build a community around it. The nail in the coffin is going to be when there's no uptake. And so that can be frustrating, I know for sure, with, some educational technologists who put all the work and all the sweat and everything into a particular application that they think's useful, but then they might throw it up on GitHub and that's the end of the story there, because maybe the hurdle's just too great for somebody to install it on their own. And so hopefully that's the role that Reclaim can play to bridge that gap and really make it easy enough for folks to use it. And then you build community around it. And then there's more of a desire, not just from the developer, but from the community to really own that application, to continue to see it forward, to update it, and to improve on it. So, I think that plays a huge role as well.
And it'd be nice to know.
I'm sorry, Alan.
It'd be nice to know, like, if there's a way when people install these, like, one of the hard things is, like, I don't always know how people are using them. And so actually I put in the footer of my things like blame Cogdog, and that's how I usually find them. I search for that string, which is not very precise, but KJ, I found out, a great, the SPLOT box is one of the newer ones. So what Daniel did is really good, but J.R. Dingwell at University of Saskatchewan did one for there's a geology class where the students curate videos about geology, and he's got a beautiful one. And so I think once people see examples, it triggers their own ideas.
I was just going to say on top of that, like, can we, Tim, get a demo of what this looks like in cPanel? So maybe kind of put what you're saying about what you build in the installer so people can actually see that, and we can talk a little bit about what that looks, because I really like the community and marketplace idea, fact of other people using it, but even just highlighting like what it means that it's an app in Reclaim, might be worth talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I can pull up, example. I could use my own domain as an example here to really show what this looks like. Give me a hot second here, and working on the fly for you. But yeah, I'm going to pull up cPanel here, and then I'll share my screen.
So how did you hear about the Dingwell one, Alan?
He had contacted me over December. He said he had this coming up, that it was something that he was going to do. So it kind of propelled me to get the media box ready, because it was just kind of an idea, because there was audio one for a while, but so that was kind of the newest one that was added. And also, I just remembered, I have a non-WordPress one that I've been meaning to put out, that's just going to be like a simple HTML site that actually lets people create the effect that's on the top of the SPLOT site. It's called the permutator. So you could put you could basically have a way to edit the words it chooses from to spell out an acronym, and it'll do that little animation. I mean, that's really puny.
Yeah.
But, I could see people use it.
Yeah, I mean, you never know how people are going to use these things, for sure. I've got my cPanel account pulled over here, and I could just show folks really quickly what this looks like. And, if somebody's familiar with our environment, then this is going to be very familiar. They would normally go in to Installatron to install an application. And you'll notice here, we did two things, actually, with this first rollout. And one I've been wanting to do for a while now, which is highlight good applications. And we do it from the homepage in some ways, but really kind of separate, the good stuff, especially the educational tools that we're building, and put those at the forefront, and things that we know the community wants, like WordPress and Omeka, and just kind of separate those out so that they're easier to find than this massive list of applications that you get. Not that there aren't good ones in there as well. But now you'll notice, like, Big Picture Calling Card is right here as an application. It's an installer that you can put in here, and we would go in, and I might do this on my timowens.io domain. I'm all about the SSL, so I'll do HTTPS. And let's just do this at /calling card. Or maybe I saw this was cool. Somebody did /me, I think, in the community forums. I was talking to somebody who had /me, and that was their calling card, which is kind of fun. It makes for a short URL. And then it's all the other standard stuff. You're setting a username, you're setting a password, and, putting in a title. I'll just leave that stuff default. And then you hit install. And so it's doing a few things there. It's installing WordPress, obviously, but then it's installing that theme. It's installing a few plugins. It's actually importing some demo content, like you said, so that you're not starting from scratch in there. It's failing completely for me because I'm doing a live demo. And that's so far with Reclaim Today seems to be a key part of the way that Reclaim Today works, is that when I try to do things, they fail. So you never really know what's going to happen. But ideally, for most people, that they wouldn't get a white screen. It's probably because I'm too advanced in my cPanel. I'm too far along. What's that?
We can edit this afterwards. Just make it look good. So pretend like it's there. That was really good.
Isn't this beautiful? Can't you see how great this looks? But yeah, it's that easy to install, and then people will get those updates automatically. and ideally that featured applications area, which right now is just 4 or 5, would grow into a really large library. And that's the dream, right? I mean, that's for us where I think we can play a huge role in this, is to really push out these applications, even the ones that, might seem, dumb or asinine or just kind of silly. Like you said, you never really know who might use them in different ways and might find them valuable. So I think it's a great chance for us to do something interesting in the space.
It's funny because there's kind of a long history of the SPLOT in that, like, I know Martha Burtis had been doing the survey stuff with Andy at UMW.
Right.
And that she did the Giphy site, or Gif It Up, I think it was. And like there have been, and Alan, you've made a ton of small tools, Tom Woodward. So it's interesting to think, like, what would it be like for the folks who are doing that? And those are just 3 examples. I'm sure there's tons at other schools. And like those ways find them into a kind of a collection of tiny teaching tools that can really be focused for folks. Like in some ways, it's the complete opposite of the LMS. And I'm beyond the state. I don't have enough years to argue about whether we should care about the LMS or not. But I think like having an alternative of these small kind of ships that can do the work quickly and can be easy is a no-brainer. It's like, why not?
And there's people like the folks at Oklahoma, Laura Gibbs. There is kind of a middle ground. They're figuring out how to take the stuff that are hosted in places like Reclaim and use them within the LMS. So I just get tired of this either or sort of useless banter and figure out what are ways we can use either or both.
Exactly. The only thing is just the exhaustion of there's very few people thinking about how to make this available on the small level, and the people are working on the go-between, absolutely. But it's like, all those, because they're small, because it's not mission critical, how would you say, enterprise software, it falls through the cracks. And I think that's part of the problem that we can kind of think about is, those tools should be just as viable, right? Like it shouldn't be an either or, it should be an and they should be viable and they should be respected and supported. So I guess that's my point. But I'm a big fan,
Yeah, and I'm excited to move forward with this. Like I said, I'm working on the other 2 calling card pages because those are going to be really easy, and then we're going to start pushing out some of these tools. And I hope even by early fall, when classes are starting up, that people have access to a lot of these and could start playing around with them, and we could start thinking about what's next. Jim, I love your idea about like how might we bring the whole community together to talk to start working on this stuff, and for things where people don't even consider themselves maybe developers, but they've done stuff like this, like Martha Burtis. I mean, she I would call her a developer, but she probably wouldn't call herself one. But there are a lot of people out there who feel like, oh, what I'm doing, it's really duct tape. It's just piecing together these various things to do something. But Alan can attest to, when I build these things, that's what I'm asking for, is just the recipe, right? Like I'm just asking for all the bits and pieces, like how do you put this together, and then automating that process. And so I think there's
on
a lot
that
of
point,
opportunity.
then, it's a good one too. On that point, Boone said this to me. I saw Boone in November or December of last year, and Boone started ed tech, went on to WordPress, got onto the Buddy Press, and now is a core developer for WordPress. And it's kind of an awesome story, right? CUNY owned. But he said, so many folks, and he was talking about Alan and many, like, they call like, I'm just hacking around, I'm just doing that. And he's like, no, like you guys are building some of the coolest stuff in WordPress, and like it should be valued and it should be promoted and it should be understood as such. And I think it was good advice from him. I think like we don't need to form a movement, let OER do the movement stuff, but we can actually like create stuff and like support it and make it a little bit more like, I don't want to call it like just viable is the term I like. Like, it's not just one and done. And that was some cool stuff that was lost. Like it could maybe, which is the nice transition to GitHub, kind of versioning a little bit and updating. And I think if we can think about that more generally, it would be super cool just to have these tools available and around.
Yeah, and even if you're the person who built it originally, the idea of automating that process is really appealing, right? Because even if I've got my recipe in my laundry list, maybe I don't feel like cooking today, and somebody says, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, okay, I'll get around to it eventually." But when you make that process easy, suddenly it's like, yeah, it's just a tool in my tool belt. It's something I can fire up on the fly to do something, and you're a lot more willing to really push that stuff out there. So. I think that's going to be huge. Go ahead and wrap this up, but thank you both. Thank you so much, Alan. We're really excited with the work that you've been doing with us and what's come of this fellowship already. And I know that it's just going to be really exciting and that relationship will continue to grow. And thanks, Jim, for joining in.
Thank you, Tim.
We never mentioned your eyes.
I know. Tell me again.
I hear that's
a man that does it.
That one stuck.
All right. Take it easy, and thank you for watching Reclaim. Bye, y'all.